Hello, this is the Scottish Football Show, and here's what's coming up. See you, Jimmy! The Dons close in on Thelin. Humbled in the Highlands, County crush Rangers for the first time. And smack my pitch up. Dundee finish in the top six. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you listeners, wherever you are. Welcome to the Scottish Football Show and what has been a masterful weekend. Yes, some of us have watched football, some of us have watched maybe more golf than football. But yes, joining me this weekend, commentator and author of A Nation Again, the inside story of Scotland's journey to the European Championships. Welcome, Andy Bargh. Should we expect another book from you, sir?
Thanks for having me. There were discussions about it, but no, I'm not doing one. No.
Ah,
There were a few hurdles too high for me to vault this time, so no. And I'm going to the Euros as a fan, and I didn't really fancy being stressed with writing and that when I was over there with all my mates. So I've scratched the itch with the first one, and I think that'll be it.
maybe you can do one on your experiences out there as a fan. That would be fun as well. There'll be plenty of good stories coming up, that's for sure. Maybe some you don't want to tell, but I'll keep that. Also joining me is mini Jaap Stam and Clement lookalike. Say hello to Findlay Marks, the creative director of Melbourne City FC.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Do you like my little intro? Because it's really in homage to, was it Paul Merson last weekend?
Yeah,
Confusing Mr. Philip Clement as Jaap Stam.
yeah. I mean, it just points to the level of punditry we've come to expect from people like Paul Merson and some of the others, not just on Sky Sports, but I think on all channels. On that, it was actually quite nice to see somebody who's I guess in a very vague way kind of formerly of this Paris James Horncastle kind of getting a lot of love online this week for his analysis after the Atalanta Liverpool Champions League game. I think a lot of times it just kind of shows you, I would say, what we have to put up with quite a lot in punditry in the UK. It's like you get somebody that comes along and genuinely gives a bit of good insight rather than the kind of say what you see type stuff. It's kind of refreshing rather than what we'd expect, whereas Sky Sports is a bit more like, no, you like these two former players that don't really know much about the game arguing to give you sound bites. It's just...
Well, they should serve a different purpose, shouldn't they? Because insight on a team's current form, players and season doesn't necessarily need to come from someone who played for that team a decade ago, right? So
Exactly.
the former player can be there to relate to the experiences of the players on the park, things that actually happen in game and in action because they've lived it and experienced it. Whereas people that research and look at teams like Atalanta and James Horncastle for a living can be there to provide that level of insight because they're kind of peeking or they're looking a lot more deeply under the surface than players would be. So there's definitely room for both. And I think it's quite often players, it's quite apparent that they don't know much about the teams that they're talking about because why would they? Whereas the journalists, it's literally their job to do that. So of course they do.
And I also enjoy the journalists, the way that they describe certain stories, and they tell stories way better than a footballer does. I mean, footballers tell great stories of what has happened to them in the past, and we love listening to them and stuff like that. But it's very difficult for ex-pros in front of the TV cameras to be themselves. And so often people fall into that trap of just being like the people they've seen on telly every year. And they start talking like, oh, well, Alan Hansen used to talk like this, so I'll talk like that, because that's how you're supposed to do punditry. Whereas you're supposed to be you. You're supposed to, get your insight. And the biggest bugbear of all is co-commentators saying exactly what we're already seeing on an angle of a replay or whatever. Like, tell me something I'm not supposed to see or that I'm not seeing. It's one of those really, really biggest bugbears in there.
You think I'm going to answer a stupid question like that?
Right, shall we have some laughs? And Finn, we have to kind of pick straight up off of the back of last weekend when we were talking about Robbie Neilson enjoying a wee dram just south of Edinburgh, but we kind of screwed it up a little bit, didn't we?
Well, I kind of did. It's because I saw the story, just to not bore everybody again with like not the weather in Melbourne, but the clocks have just changed as well. So I'm recording now rather than at 9 a.m. I think we used to record at recording at 5 a.m. So I'm very much like waking up, blearily looking through some stuff on Twitter now. It's something that come to my attention. I've got to say, I'm kind of gutted it's not real, that it wasn't in fact Robbie Neilson putting on a French accent at Distillery. The actual truth came to light slightly later on, that it was somebody connected with football. It was former World Cup winner and Chelsea and Man United midfielder Juan Mata, who, when you put them side to side, looks a lot like Robbie Neilson. You can see where the confusion. I just don't know how, even on a base level, you can't tell a Spanish accent and a French one apart. That kind of confused me, but anyway.
Well, I will flag and say Juan Mata sometimes doesn't like to be recognised, because I met Juan Mata in Chiswick once, and this was kind of recent after he'd signed for Chelsea, and long story short, he came to me. This was after hours at a pub, and he was like, "Can I go somewhere?" And he was with two absolutely stunning Spanish women, right? And he's like, "Where can I go?" And there's nowhere. If you know London, if you know Chiswick, there's kind of no clubs round there at all, apart from a place called the Redbacks, which used to play pop punk music and would host New Zealanders, Australians, and South Africans, and would always end in a bar fight. So my advice to Juan Mata then was, "You're best just going home. You should definitely go home, and because you'll get recognised." And he was like, "What? Who are you talking about? I don't know what you mean." I was like, "You're Juan Mata. I just started working for ESPN." I'm like, "I work for ESPN, man. Like, I know who you are. Like, and I just saw you play. You're amazing." And he's just like, "No, no, no, no." He got really like shirty with me. That was funny. So yeah, at least he's now approachable.
Maybe it was a wee swally that just relaxed him a wee bit.
Perhaps. Have you seen the news about Livingston? Apart from their impending relegation, they have new sponsors. They're no longer sponsored by Tony Macaroni. So dead is the Spaghettihad. Now we get to enjoy, or well, Livingston fans get to enjoy being sponsored by a taxi company, and it's now referred to as the Cab New, or the New Cab. Kudos to Scotland's Coefficient on Twitter for putting that up with a lovely little graphic. I'm sure AI was involved.
Can you give us the full actual name of the stadium? Because I think there's a bit of a competition, it seems, amongst Scottish teams that sell the naming rights to their stadiums to who has the longest and kind of like least roll off the tongue stadium name possible. And I think Livy might just have eclipsed all the other teams now.
Home of the Setfair Arena.
Which sounds absolutely ridiculous. Rivaling, I think, in recent seasons, I think we've had Hamilton were sponsored by a marijuana company at one point.
Yeah, the CBD Stadium.
Hamilton's New Douglas Park was also known as the Fountain of Youth Stadium. So to me, this kind of like sets a new high bar for ridiculous names for Scottish football stadia.
The dogs bark and the caravan passes. The caravan keeps moving. The caravan keeps going.
Right, let's get stuck into some of the big news that's came over the last couple of days. But of course, we record this on a Sunday night, so it'll all be worthless by the time you listen to this, probably. But fingers crossed, it won't be. Well, Aberdeen are supposedly close to agreeing a deal to announce the Elfsborg boss, Jimmy Thelin, or Yimmy Thelin, as their new manager. Who knows? By the time this pod is out, as I've already said, yeah, he's probably already been announced, because it's supposed to be, guys, the rumour is June the 1st. But a little bit of background on Jimmy, or Yimmy. He's been in charge of Elfsborg for about 6 years. He's had 2 runners-up with them. Malmo are kind of like unbeatable over these last kind of couple of years as well. But 2 runners-up with Elfsborg, and a local journalist from Sweden also said that this appointment, if it were to happen, would be the death of any exciting headlines to come from Aberdeen. Basically saying he doesn't give anything away. He's really boring in post-match interviews or pre-match interviews. Which, to be fair, maybe Aberdeen fans would look forward to that. Andy, you've had you used to commentate on Aberdeen TV, didn't you? Like, you must be able to gauge how imperative it is for Aberdeen to get this decision right.
I still do a wee bit of commentary now and again. Rob McLean does the vast majority of them, but I'll step in maybe 3 or 4 times a season or something. So I actually did one recently when they beat Motherwell 1-0 away from home. Nice goal from Clarkson. Yeah, actually, I've actually got a very close friend who's a big Aberdeen fan. And when all the names were getting bandied about, Robinson, Lennon, Jack Ross and all that, he, like a lot of Aberdeen fans, could not have been more assertive that he was interested in none of them. And I would put forward, not arguments, kind of more devil's advocate conversationally, saying like, would they be that bad? Like Neil Lennon's a decent manager. I think Stephen Robinson's done a good job at St Mirren. And he was just basically saying they are all so boring choices. We want the club to think outside the box a little bit. So I suppose they've met fan expectation on that, but there's no guarantee ever about any manager and how it's going to go. I mean, Aberdeen could hire Jurgen Klopp when he leaves Liverpool, and it could go badly. You just don't really know. So I think that what this at least does for Aberdeen is give them something new, and they've had Glass, Goodwin, and Robson, so they've had new things over the last couple of years. But I'd say that Glass aside, because he came in like kind of on a bit of a who you know basis with Cormac, and that this is an appointment that is fresh. I'd say really, it's a name that nobody knows, and it's unpredictable, and Aberdeen could do with, I think, something like that after a couple of very stale years. What I think they do need to be is patient. I've said this to my mate Luke as well, that if you are rubbish next season and are 9th come March, you just can't hound them out. You just can't do that. You need to play your part as a fan base and let this guy grow a team over 18 months to 2 years if you are going to allow him to practice what you're all preaching to him as a fan base.
I suppose, but the thing is, like, even with Robson, you know, he was hounded out, and the previous managers have been hounded out because there's a kind of threat of relegation, and the form has been so bad. But even when you think that Aberdeen are going to have to fork out some money for Thelin Finn because he's still under contract at Elfsborg, that in itself kind of says the board would have to give him time, because it probably won't be on a year's contract. And if this guy's as astute as we kind of think he's supposed to be, he has to be given that time.
Yeah, he does. And I think Andy's absolutely right. There needs to be buy-in from the club and from the fans with this appointment. I think it's a really interesting one in terms of looking at his track record, because I think we'd be lying if we said we were familiar with him before his name started to get linked, but doing a little bit of reading around him and everything, he has something that not a lot of Aberdeen managers, I would say, in the recent past have had, which is experience and a demonstrable track record and a clear playing style. 3 things that I think Aberdeen are in real need of, because with Goodwin's obviously got a bit more of a track record, but with Glass and Robson, they were rookies. Like, that was their first managerial jobs, really. So, and it's a high pressure job at Aberdeen. Like, you're expected to be third. In many metrics, they are the 3rd biggest team in the country in terms of transfer fees and wages and a lot of other things. There's a lot of pressure that comes with Aberdeen. We've seen them falter so often in the last number of years when they failed to get appointments right. And a lot of them have felt to be either, I don't want to say cheap options, but just very practical options of who's available at this time of the season, because they tend to be sacking managers midway through a season. I think for them to kind of just have underwritten this season and just be like, right, we're just getting this out the way, we need to get the appointment right, and starting it fresh from next season, knowing who that person is when they've got months to prepare as well, so they'll be able to come in and hit the ground running. I think looking at his playing style as well, I know he's meant to be a bit of a boring character, but he's got a very preferred playing style, a manager that prefers playing on a high press as well. Not that concerned with a lot of ball possession, but being very aggressive in transitions and trying to almost bully teams, I think, on the back foot, pushing them forward. I've always kind of felt that, like, Scandinavia is an area where it's such an untapped resource still, which is really interesting. I remember, because growing up, the late 90s and into the 2000s, you did have like this slew of great players that were coming from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, well, into the British game. But there were a couple of really successful ones. I remember at Aberdeen, at Dundee United, you had really good players coming from Scandinavia. For some reason, it's been something that's not really happened over the last number of years. But there's still terrific value to be seen there. A good example of that maybe is Alfredo Morelos, who was playing in Finland. Rangers picked him up for a very cheap fee, and he was a great servant to them. So there's great talent there on the pitch, but also I think managerially we've seen Graham Potter as well coming through with the whole kind of like Moneyball approach, and we've seen his career trajectory since then. So there's a lot of talent and good thinking and progressive thinking in those countries and in those leagues. So I think it'll be really good. I like you're saying, almost off the back of what you're saying as well, Andrew. I get that sentiment from the Aberdeen fans of this merry-go-round of Scottish football managers. It just seems to be like whenever there's a vacancy at a certain level of club, it's just like, well, will Neil Lennon get it? Will Malcolm Mackay, who's been linked with a billion other jobs? It's nice to see a club trying to maybe be a bit more progressive and think outside the box.
There aren't many foreign manager success stories in the top flight in Scotland.
No,
Not really.
not
I think
really.
I saw a thread going around, and the best people could come up with was Paulo Sergio, I think, for the ones outside Celtic and Rangers anyway. I think so.
I
On the
guess so, yeah.
before we move on the lack of headlines thing, I really respect a manager who gives the media nothing. If I was a manager, I would be exactly the same and doesn't get drawn into any rubbish. I think Philippe Clement seems to have been quite good at swatting down the kind of cliche-driven questions and same old stuff on a weekly basis. And after what Aberdeen fans had to go through with Warnock over the last few months, I think that they'll feel quite pleased to have a manager who's happy just to zip his lips and not get drawn into any of the nonsense that we have to often see do the rounds in Scotland.
Right, there was some news at Motherwell as well. At the beginning of April this month, Motherwell said that they'd entered into an agreement. Exciting, right? With a US-based family who look to invest in the club. Now, those people have kind of came out. It's Eric Barmack, who is the former vice president of Netflix. He's came forward as one of the investors with his wife. He said that this isn't born out of the success of the likes of like Wrexham's docu-series and stuff like that. And he is, of course, obviously involved with the Formula One program. If I don't know if you've seen it, Drive to Survive. It's all right, but F1 fans seem to enjoy it. It's early doors, so we won't go in this too deep. And I'm sure, well, if we were to release our WhatsApp chats with Laura Brannan, we'll leave the deep stuff until Laura's back on the podcast. But what's your initial thoughts? You know, US money coming into. We've spoken about sugar daddies on this podcast before, Finn. It's early doors, but are we led to believe this is a good thing?
I think there's a lot of wariness in Scottish football, isn't there, from kind of outside investment coming from people that seem to have no tangible link or prior interest to a specific team or whatever. I mean, Motherwell, more than most, have been burned by this in the past with the kind of sugar daddy model. From my understanding, this guy, Barmack, wants to come in as an investor, not as owner. So he's not coming in to like buy out the club, essentially. He sees it as investing money in a club that he finds interesting. Reading some of what he was saying to the media, he is saying a lot of stuff that I would want to hear if I were a fan of a Scottish football team.
Which is an immediate red flag. An immediate red flag. Wait a minute.
Yeah. If
it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Essentially what he was saying was he can see a lot of value in Scottish football in particular because of a lot of the clubs are still community assets, and Motherwell obviously being run by the Welsh Society. I think if it's somebody that's coming in from Netflix, and I've led to believe as well his wife works for Snapchat, and both of them at a fairly high level, I would argue a fairly influential level. If they're bringing any kind of expertise from that, I mean, how much are we always saying that Scottish football clubs should learn how to market themselves better and know how to sell not just their clubs but the league better. I think having people like that involved in not just Motherwell but the Scottish game at large could be a good thing. If there's that level of expertise to share with other clubs. I mean, I'm just not as close to the situation as I think Laura would be. She definitely vehemently was much more, this is an enormous red flag on several fronts.
You make a good point though, Finn. You make a good point though in the fact that if these people are still like super connected, and if they're going to put money in the club, and if they're going to want to get something out of the club, they're going to use their contacts to try and maximise that as best as they possibly can. And they are most definitely in good positions to do that. And it was going to be one of my questions, really, that does Scottish football kind of need someone from the outside to create something a bit different? Not like the Wrexham story or whatever, because that's completely different. But just, I don't know what you could do differently, Andy.
Well, it's important. I know that with the Scottish football self-deprecating approach that fans sometimes take, it's shite, but it's our shite kind of thing. And it's important still, though, not to gatekeep it. Like, football is a global sport. And if somebody is interested in Scottish football, then great. And then we must be doing something right.
For me, one of the sentiments that I've certainly heard is, if nothing's concrete, why is he coming out and making it public in the first place? Like, most people would stay in the shadows and wait for everything. Because you look at the likes of Bill Foley at Bournemouth and the connection with Hibs. That was a long, drawn-out process, but it all kind of came out near the end. So these kind of things that, some people have said these are worrying things. But enough of that news now. We're going to move on because it's Scottish Cup weekend.
Regrets? No, it's good laugh on it. So
I didn't find it funny.
Aberdeen play Celtic on Saturday, 12:30. Then Rangers on Sunday against Hearts, which is kind of a repeat of the semi-final of the League Cup this season. But if we focus on the first game, Brendan Rodgers has yet to lose a match in the Scottish Cup. But of course, he did lose in the League Cup to Kilmarnock this season. So records are being broken from Celtic's side under Brendan Rodgers. They are, of course, Dazen Maida is a player that they're going to miss probably for the rest of the season, but they were still 3-0 winners against St Mirren on Saturday. And Aberdeen, although they drew 0-0 with Dundee, they are also unbeaten in the last 4 games. So thoughts on this match before we talk about Rangers Hearts? Andrew, what do you think?
I think Celtic will win pretty comfortably. I think the other semi will be closer. I think Aberdeen, with the way that their season is going, I don't think they'll rescue any sort of pride with the Scottish Cup.
Well, here's a question quickly for you then. Say they do announce Jimmy Thelin before that match. Do you think that could boost players' kind of feeling going into the match? Do you think they might even play better, sort of thing? Something to be like, oh, I want to stay at Aberdeen, sort of feeling.
No, I don't think so. No.
Shut up.
I think if he was there, possibly aye, because I think that they would feel the urgency and the pressure to perform literally in front of the new manager a lot more. But I think Celtic will see Aberdeen off. They've looked all right recently, Celtic, haven't they? They've been pretty good. I know that they had a pretty lacklustre second half against Rangers, but generally I think Celtic have been pretty good. So I think that they'll see Aberdeen off and get to the final. Celtic in cup competitions don't really give away too many opportunities in recent seasons, so I think that they'll be fine. And I do expect an Old Firm final. I think that the prospect of it happening for the first time, is it 20 years or so? Was it 2002, the Lovencrans game? Is that the last one? Scottish Cup final between Celtic and Rangers. There have been League Cup finals, but I don't think there's been a Scottish Cup final between Celtic and Rangers in 20 years.
It could be a tasty one, but of course, if Rangers were to get through there, they still have to beat Hearts. Hearts were 4-2 winners over Livingston at the weekend. But I do wonder if, with the way Rangers are playing recently, obviously the loss to Ross County, which we'll speak about in a bit, and the performance against Celtic wasn't so great. And the thing is, with Hearts, they've got kind of that whole kind of revenge on on their side. They were absolutely smashed by Rangers. Was it 5-1 in the league? And they were obviously League Cup semi-final defeat as well to Rangers. Is this a good time to face Rangers for Hearts?
It could be, although I think is Hearts' record against Rangers at Hampden not abysmal? Have they ever beaten Rangers at Hampden? I think we had. I can't remember what the stat was from when we reviewed the League Cup semi-finals, but it was something like that. So they've got an appalling record at Hampden against Rangers. I think Andy's right. I think the Rangers Hearts game will be close, probably, but Rangers I would expect to get through eventually, even if it's extra time that's needed. Celtic, I think, will be very comfortable against Aberdeen. I think even the new manager bounce, I just think Celtic have got the M-word momentum behind them at the moment. And Aberdeen, although they've not lost in 4, are still not really doing much with their season. It'll be interesting to see what happens as well with the atmosphere in the stadium at Rangers Hearts, because Hearts made a big song and dance about getting the 50-50 split, which in principle, I find it hard that anybody could argue that it's not the fairest way to start. But I think Hearts have only sold 16,000 tickets. So there's about 4,000 tickets unsold.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Which the club have said they will pay for any unsold tickets because they wanted the opportunity of a 50-50 split. At the moment, 4,000 tickets, all at adult prices, would be a sizable chunk of change. That's pushing 6 figures that Hearts would have to stump up.
They'll sell it. I reckon they will. I reckon they will sell it. It's one of those things. I think because the most important thing, I think Naismith has came out even himself to try and get fans to kind of, get your wallet out. Hurry up. It is a wee bit, I know it's a concern.
See, just a question though as a football fan. If your team makes it to a national semi-final, are you waiting until the week of the game, a couple of days before the game, to buy a ticket for it and make plans to travel through? And if you do you reckon 4,000, so that's a quarter of what's already been sold, would do that? I'm not so sure. So
well, Aberdeen have been burned by this in the past as well, and they argued heavily for the 50-50 and failed. So
they have. I don't know why. I mean, we've said this thing about the protocol so many times. Start with 50-50, and if you haven't sold it by a certain date, give more money to one of the other teams. Invariably, it's Rangers or Celtic. But I think it was the Hearts chief executive or one of the high up board members had come out and said, if we don't sell the tickets, it's not a good look to start with. But also, it does impact their chances of getting a 50-50 split in the future, because you know that Rangers or Celtic would sell out 4,000 tickets like that. It's just the size of the fan bases and everything is kind of disappointing. I think that Hearts fans haven't snapped them up more to make it more of an occasion, but maybe it says, it's just the way that they feel maybe about playing Rangers at Hampden with the record that they've got, that they don't see much point to it. It's disappointing for the spectacle. If there's 4,000 empty seats that could have been sold to other supporters, it's just not a great look for the game.
Yeah. Now, sticking with Rangers, but focusing really more on Ross County. Sunday was a massive, monumental, a historical victory for Ross County on Sunday, because it was their first ever win over Rangers in their history, as I'm aware. I don't know if there's any friendlies knocking around or whatever. But an unbelievable game, really, finishing 3-2. At one point, Ross County were 3-1 up before it was James Tavernier got a penalty. Penalty to Rangers in the last dying minutes of the game. But it's amazing now for Ross County, this momentum that they can take from this match. They're still in the relegation playoff places, Andrew, but they could not only seal Livingston's demise down to the Championship, but they're only a point behind St Johnstone now with this victory.
It's funny how quickly things change, isn't it? With St Johnstone's win last week, kind of coming from nothing as well, just parking the bus against Hibs and hitting them well when it mattered. And then at that point, people are thinking, all right, one more win for St Johnstone and that could be them okay, genuinely. And, they stumble against Killie yesterday, and all of a sudden County have pulled a win from nowhere when nobody expected it, and it's back to a point. It's really great stuff. And I had the chat with the boys today. Are Aberdeen out of it? Are Aberdeen still in trouble here? They're 4 points above County, I think, maybe 5.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not far enough yet that Aberdeen can say we're good. Not far enough yet. I think Motherwell are okay, but yeah, I think Aberdeen have to be very wary. I don't think they'll go down, but I think that they could easily
Yeah.
end up they could easily end up evading the playoffs by a point or two. I think that is the situation that Aberdeen are in.
And in fairness, this is why we mentioned in the last pod as well, like why the split is so good. Because the caliber of matches is well evenly matched between all the sides now, and
Yeah.
there's so much riding on it for a lot of teams. Everything's tight everywhere. It's going to be a really good rundown. And obviously, again, when this pod goes out, we'll probably know what the split fixtures are and kind of we know kind of when they're happening. But sticking with this game, Finn, as a Rangers fan, I know you'll be concerned for a lot of things, but the fact that Ross County's XG in this game had a value of 2.96. Now, that's actually the highest of any team against Rangers in the league this season, which is unbelievable. And watching this game, like, particularly at the start of the second half, like, the way that County cut through Rangers so easily, I've never seen before. And I'm like, what Ross County team is this? And I don't want to be. It's definitely Ross County's day, but it was so bad from Rangers. In fact, it's the stat here is it's the most XG Rangers have conceded in a single game since Opta started collecting Scottish Premiership data, which was only 2019, 2020. That's damning.
It is pretty damning. But we've seen Dingwall's been a place where Rangers' title ambitions have gone to die in recent seasons as well. Remember the 3-3 game that was up there a few seasons ago as well. I don't know if it's just part of the natural nihilism that comes with football fans, but I had a bit of a weird feeling ahead of this game. Maybe it's a bit of the scar tissue from that 3-3 game as well a couple of years ago, but Ross County have not been in great form broadly, but when you look at the last 5 matches, their only victory has come against Hearts. So there's something maybe where the pressure's off more, where they're not expected to do as much, that there's just a bit more freedom to go at it. I think that combined with the fact that Rangers, I think, put in their worst defensive display that I can remember in the last couple of seasons. It was totally shambolic. But I think it's also something that's not coming as a surprise. You mentioned the Hearts game just there, the 5-1 game. I think that's the last time Rangers looked really like they were clicking. But since then, they've lost at home to Motherwell. They were very lucky not to lose at home to Celtic, and now they've lost deservedly away at Ross County. And a lot of the defensive shape, the mistakes that they're making are basic. We said off the back of the Old Firm game last week, I was convinced that actually both Rangers and Celtic would drop more points before the end of the season. I didn't think it was going to be all down to the Old Firm game at Parkhead after the split. I think Celtic will drop more points as well. It's kind of who's going to stumble over the finish line first. I do think there's a lot of things coming home to roost for Rangers. I think the fact that they're even in a title fight shows the job that Clement's done. But the biggest issues still remain. This is a squad that's been together for a long time, who aren't getting any younger, and a lot of the issues are the same ones that have been there for seasons, regardless of who the manager's been. I think Clement's done an amazing job and wrung out what he can from the squad, but I think we're seeing the real Rangers in the last couple of matches.
There's no, Findlay, hold on.
Yes.
Rangers could beat Celtic and win the league. Like that is the bottom line at the moment. If they win on Wednesday, Rangers could still very easily win the league.
They could, but I don't think they will, because I think when you look historically, Andy, I don't think Rangers have ever won at Parkhead after the split. Obviously, as a Rangers fan, very happy to be proved wrong. I don't see Rangers going to Parkhead and winning, and that's what they have to do now.
I'm going to stop you, Finn, because we need to move on. We need to move on because Dundee are a massive story in this podcast. We need to talk about them finishing top 6 for the first time since 2015, which I think was a season where they'd also just been promoted to the top flight. So they've done it again, and what a job Tony Dock has done too. But I should also say congratulations to Motherwell for Dundee because their Motherwell drawing with Hibs and Dundee drawing with Aberdeen, Hibernian were winning 1-0, and then Motherwell equalised, which effectively sealed Dundee getting in the top six. And I feel for Motherwell because they probably should have won the game with Ollie Shaw in the final minute. But it's Dundee's to enjoy and could still catch the likes of St Mirren. And yeah, a wonderful job done from Tony Dock and his team. But have you seen the story that Hibernian, even before the weekend, had flagged to the SPFL about sporting integrity because of their match with Rangers on Tuesday being postponed yet again? And so they had more time to prepare for the Aberdeen game. Okay, it was 0-0, but is there a real question on sporting integrity, or should we just park this and enjoy Dundee's season?
I do think that Dundee should face consequences for having to postpone these games, because they're alone in that, and they're not a Lowland League club. This is a Scottish Premiership turf, we're supposed to be, and at 200 yards or whatever it is down the road, Tannadice and Dundee United are milking this quite rightly. Looks completely lovely and so playable despite literally the exact same weather. So what they're saying about Dundee being able to sign players because they're using the cash on their playing squad rather than to maintain their park.
Yeah, they got rid of their ground staff in February.
And it's now coming back to affect the league as a whole. I don't think it's a massive deal, like they should be docked points or anything like that. But I do think that they should certainly be told to shape up and make sure that next season that they have a pitch that can handle rain the way that their neighbours can.
Yeah, I mean, we hear the term sporting integrity ad nauseum in Scottish football. I don't think there was an enormous advantage in Dundee having still got the Rangers game to play before the split. I think in some grounds it kind of it just diminishes a bit from like that the split day, because there's one fixture still to go that now is immaterial, but it just kind of detracts a bit from the excitement of it, and because it's almost like a mini final day of the season. But I don't think it really changed much what the clubs had to do, and again, it's immaterial now that Motherwell drew with Hibs. So I don't know about that. I think when was it this week that we saw one of the Dundee board members talk about how it's all down to climate change? I was like, that's interesting. That, across the street, they've not been affected by climate change. So something weird going on there.
So bollocks. Oh, that is class. And yeah, like we've already seen and you've mentioned, Andy, it's lovely just 100 metres away. We've not mentioned St Johnstone's defeat to Kilmarnock. Another victory for Derek McInnes' side. They're 5 matches unbeaten now. They've already secured top 6.
One thing in Slaven, if I could jump in on that, is the Marley Watkins situation. So great season for Killie this season.
Yeah,
I think I'm pretty sure he's in double figures, keeping Van Veen out of the team.
He is.
So really, really great season for Killie. I think the contract situation, obviously, there's one on the table for him. McInnes and the fans would love him to stay. But I think this just shines a light on the sacrifices and the balances that footballers often have to make with their family life. So he's got a kid and a partner, I would assume as well, but certainly a young kid that lives in the south of England. Mm-hmm. So if Killie are putting this to him, and if he leaves, I'm pretty sure that the Killie fans, not all of them, but some of them would probably take a bit of umbrage, maybe without knowing the full story, if he decides to move on, that that there's so much more to life than playing football. Obviously, everyone has to earn a living somehow, but if Marley Watkins goes and signs, I don't know who it would be for, say, a League 1 or League 2 club down in England and get a good wage down near his family, I think he would probably be, and I'm hypothesising here, but I think he would maybe be criticised a wee bit for that, about leaving the Scottish Premiership to go and play at a lower level in England. But there's so much more to these decisions than just the level of football that you're playing at. If he's got a young, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but he's got a young kid down in the south of England, I'm pretty sure it's Brighton, it must take so much for Marley Watkins to commit to staying for another year at Killie. And he's been up here a few times. He's been at Aberdeen, even further. So whether or not he stays, I'm sure the Killie fans would love him to get another 10 goals next season, but having a kid way down there, that would be an incredible sacrifice for him to hang around for another year.
Yeah, you can understand that from a human level. It makes so much sense. Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Andrew. It's been a pleasure having you back on the podcast.
No, thanks for asking me. Always happy.
Yeah, very good. You go enjoy your dinner now, son. You have a
Thank you.
great time. What have you got?
I don't know. There was a Gusto delivery today, so my beautiful girlfriend Alex is away in making it. So
Check
I
you
don't know
out.
what one. I don't know what one she's picked. So yeah.
Very nice. And if you would like a Gusto box, you can get 10% off if you hashtag TSFN.
other food delivery companies are available.
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it, Finn? Get a wee Gusto sponsorship. That would be delicious. I love that.
I don't know what the postage and packaging is to Melbourne from the UK, but might not be in good nick by the time it gets here either. But I'll send my box to you, Andrew.
Thanks, mate. I need it. All right. Well, if you're still listening, as you all well know, if you're a regular listener, this is the time to go away and listen to something else. Just do something. Goodbye.